A prehistoric shark was larger than a school bus, but that's not even the most terrifying thing that lived before humans. I'm about to show you creatures so impossible, you'll wonder how Earth survived long enough for us to exist. Life on Earth didn't start with a bang. It began as a whisper in an alien world that would have killed you in seconds. Over 3.5 billion years ago, our planet looked nothing like the green and blue marble we know today. The air was toxic, filled with methane and ammonia. No oxygen to breathe, no trees swaying in the breeze, just endless oceans under a hazy orange sky that would make Mars jealous. But something incredible was brewing in those ancient waters. The first living things weren't cute puppies or colorful flowers. They were microscopic bacteria so tiny you'd need a powerful microscope just to spot them. These little guys were the ultimate survivors, thriving in conditions that would instantly fry any modern life form. They didn't need oxygen because there wasn't any around. Instead, they munched on chemicals and soaked up energy from the sun in ways we're still trying to fully understand. Here's where it gets wild. These bacteria weren't content just floating around doing nothing. They started building. Layer by layer, year after year, they constructed massive rock towers called stromatolites. Think of them as underwater skyscrapers made by the world's tiniest construction workers. Each layer represents countless generations of bacteria living, dying, and leaving behind their mineral shells. The crazy part? You can still see these ancient apartments today. Stromatolites exist in places like Shark Bay, Australia, where modern bacteria continue the same building project their ancestors started billions of years ago. It's like finding a construction site that's been running since before your great-great-great-grandmother was even a twinkle in evolution's eye. But why should we care about these microscopic blobs? Well, they basically invented the air we breathe. As these early bacteria went about their daily business, they started doing something revolutionary called photosynthesis. They began gobbling up carbon dioxide and spitting out oxygen as waste. Imagine that. The stuff we desperately need to survive was literally ancient bacterial garbage. This oxygen revolution didn't happen overnight. We're talking about hundreds of millions of years of slow, steady change. The atmosphere gradually shifted from a toxic soup to something that could eventually support more complex life. Without these bacterial pioneers working around the clock for eons, Earth would still be a lifeless rock floating through space. The bacteria themselves evolved into different types, each finding their own special niche. Some loved the scalding hot water around underwater volcanoes. Others preferred the cold, dark depths where no sunlight could reach. A few even figured out how to turn sulfur into food. Talk about being resourceful. Then there's the teamwork aspect that'll blow your mind. Some bacteria discovered they could accomplish more by joining forces. They started forming colonies, sharing resources, and even dividing up tasks like tiny specialized workers. One group would handle food production, while another dealt with waste management. Sound familiar? They basically invented the first cities, complete with different neighborhoods for different jobs. These bacterial cities became the foundation for everything that followed. Eventually, some bacteria became so good at working together that they permanently merged into single, more complex cells. These supercells had different compartments for different functions, like rooms in a house. This was huge because it paved the way for every plant, animal, and fungus that would ever exist. The really mind-bending part is realizing that bacteria are still running the show behind the scenes. They help plants grow, keep our digestive systems working, and even influence the weather. Every breath you take depends on the oxygen-making legacy these ancient microbes established billions of years ago. Without their groundwork, there would be no forests, no whales, no humans arguing about pizza toppings. But bacteria weren't satisfied with just creating the conditions for life. They kept evolving, kept experimenting, kept pushing boundaries. Some developed the ability to move around using tiny whip-like tails. Others learned to form protective shells or create their own internal chemical factories. They became masters of adaptation, surviving ice ages, asteroid impacts, and volcanic catastrophes that wiped out much larger creatures. The bacterial world was incredibly diverse, but it was just the opening act. After billions of years of microbial dominance, something spectacular was brewing in the ancient oceans. The stage was being set for an explosion of creativity that would make even the most imaginative science fiction writer jealous. Strange new creatures with multiple eyes, bizarre body plans, and alien-like features were about to burst onto the scene in what scientists call one of the most important events in Earth's history. After billions of years of nothing but microscopic bacteria floating around in ancient oceans, something absolutely bonkers happened. Around 540 million years ago, life decided to throw the wildest party in Earth's history. Scientists call it the Cambrian explosion, and boy, did things get weird fast. Within just 25 million years, which sounds long but is basically a blink of an eye in geological terms, dozens of bizarre creatures appeared out of nowhere. Well, not literally nowhere, but the fossil record makes it look like evolution went completely crazy and started experimenting with the most outlandish designs possible. These weren't your typical animals. These were creatures so strange that if someone drew them in a comic book today, you'd probably think they were making stuff up. Take Opabinia, for instance. This little guy had 5 mushroom-shaped eyes on top of its head and a flexible tube for a mouth that ended in a grabbing claw. Makes sense, right? Actually, no, it makes absolutely no sense at all. The thing looked like someone took spare parts from 5 different animals and glued them together during a fever dream. It was about 3 inches long and spent its time crawling along the ocean floor, using that bizarre tube mouth to snatch up prey. Scientists stared at Opabinia fossils for decades, scratching their heads and wondering what on earth they were looking at, but Opabinia wasn't even the weirdest tenant in this underwater freak show. Meet Hallucigenia. And yes, that's its real name. When paleontologists first discovered this creature, they literally thought they were hallucinating. Picture a walking cactus with 7 pairs of spiky stilts for legs and a row of defensive spikes running down its back. For years, scientists couldn't even figure out which end was the head and which was the tail. They kept flipping their reconstructions upside down and backwards, trying to make sense of this spiky nightmare. The bizarre part is that Hallucigenia actually worked as a design. Those stilts weren't just for show, they helped it walk across the muddy seafloor without sinking in. The defensive spikes kept predators from making it into a quick snack. Evolution might have been experimenting, but it wasn't being completely random about it. Then, there was the apex predator of this strange world, Anomalocaris. This beast grew up to 6 feet long, making it absolutely massive compared to everything else swimming around. It had no bones, no shell, no teeth, and no jaws, yet somehow became the ocean's top killer. Instead of teeth, it sported 2 flexible arms in front of its circular mouth, perfect for grabbing smaller creatures and stuffing them into what basically amounted to a living garbage disposal. Anomalocaris moved through the water by undulating its flexible body like a giant ribbon with fins running along its sides. The whole thing looked more like an alien spaceship than any animal we know today. Its eyes were compound, like a fly's, but each one was the size of a dinner plate. Scientists found fossilized bite marks from Anomalocaris on other Cambrian creatures, proving this gentle-looking giant was actually a ruthless predator. What makes these Cambrian creatures so fascinating isn't just their weirdness, it's how many evolutionary experiments were happening all at once. Most of the body plans we see in animals today first appeared during this explosion. Eyes evolved independently dozens of times. Some creatures developed shells, others grew spikes, and some went completely soft and squishy. Let's not forget that many of these bizarre designs were complete evolutionary dead ends. Opabinia left no descendants. Hallucigenia's family tree leads nowhere. These weren't practice runs for better animals. They were perfectly functional solutions to survival that just happened to lose out in the long game of evolution. The really mind-bending part? Some Cambrian creatures still puzzle scientists today. Take the Tully monster, which lived a bit later but captures that same spirit of biological confusion. This thing was so weird that researchers still argue about whether it was a worm, a fish, or something else entirely. It had a long proboscis with a claw at the end, eyes on stalks, and a fin-shaped tail. Even with modern technology and detailed fossils, nobody can agree on what the heck it actually was. The Cambrian seas were like nature's ultimate laboratory, where evolution threw every possible design at the wall to see what would stick. Most didn't, but the ones that survived gave rise to all the major animal groups we know today, including the lineage that would eventually crawl out of those ancient oceans and take their first tentative steps onto dry land. And speaking of taking those first steps, what happened when life finally decided the ocean wasn't exciting enough anymore gets even more interesting. After millions of years of weird ocean creatures doing their thing underwater, something incredible was about to happen. Life was ready to take its biggest leap yet. literally stepping out of the water and onto dry land. But here's the thing nobody tells you. The first animals to make this move weren't brave little fish taking baby steps onto a beach. They were massive, armored bugs that would make your worst nightmares seem cute. Picture a millipede longer than your bedroom. That's Arthropleura, stretching over 6 feet from head to tail and built like a living tank. These giants weren't messing around. They had thick protective shells and dozens of legs that could carry them across the early landscape like prehistoric bulldozers. The weird part is, they were vegetarians. All that armor and intimidating size, and they spent their days munching on dead plants and rotting wood. But wait, there's a plot twist. Plants had actually beaten all the animals to land by millions of years. Those early green pioneers had been quietly setting up shop on the continents, creating the first forests and basically preparing a welcome mat for everything that would follow. Without these plant trailblazers, those giant millipedes would have had nothing to eat, and the whole land invasion might never have happened. Then, there's the fish story that sounds completely made up, but isn't. Some fish back then were getting restless in their ponds and streams. When water levels dropped during dry seasons, these fish faced a choice: die or figure out how to survive on land for a while. The smart ones had already evolved something incredible: lungs. Yeah, fish with lungs. They could actually breathe air when they needed to, which gave them a massive advantage over their purely water-breathing cousins. These lungfish also had something else going for them: super strong fins. Not the flimsy fins you see on goldfish, but thick muscular fins packed with bones that could actually support their weight. When their ponds started drying up, they used these powerful fins to drag themselves across land to find new water sources. Makes sense, right? Except some of them started spending more and more time on land, and their fins gradually turned into something even more useful: legs. Meet Ichthyostega, one of the earliest creatures that really nailed this whole walking thing. This guy was like nature's rough draft of what would eventually become all land animals with backbones. Ichthyostega still had gills for underwater breathing, but it also had lungs for air breathing. Plus, it had 4 actual legs instead of fins, though they were pretty clunky compared to what would come later. Think of it as a fish that was really committed to this whole land-walking experiment. Let's not forget about the early insects, because they were absolutely crushing it during this time. While everything else was still figuring out how to walk without falling over, insects had already mastered the ultimate superpower: flight. And they weren't small and humble about it either. Meganeura was basically a dragonfly on steroids with wings spanning nearly 2 feet across. These flying monsters ruled the skies like prehistoric fighter jets, hunting smaller insects and probably scaring the living daylights out of anything trying to evolve on the ground below. The reason these insects could grow so huge has everything to do with oxygen levels back then. Earth's atmosphere was absolutely packed with oxygen, way more than we have today. More oxygen meant insects could grow larger without suffocating, which explains why we had dragonflies the size of hawks and other bugs that would send people running for the hills today. But here's what really blows your mind. All of this land colonization was happening in slow motion compared to evolution today. We're talking about millions of years for these major changes to take hold. Those first tentative steps onto land weren't happening over a few generations. They were the result of countless tiny improvements building up over geological timescales that make human history look like a blink of an eye. The early amphibians that followed Ichthyostega kept getting better at the whole land-living thing, but they never completely cut ties with water. They still needed to return to ponds and streams to lay their eggs, which meant they were always tied to aquatic environments in some way. This dependency would eventually become a limitation, but some creatures were already working on solutions that would change everything. What's fascinating is that while these early land pioneers were establishing the basic blueprint for life on continents, other evolutionary experiments were happening simultaneously in the oceans and skies. The stage was being set for even more dramatic changes ahead. Changes that would produce creatures so massive and dominant that they'd make these early land colonizers look like timid beginners testing the waters of what life could become. After life conquered the land, you'd think things would settle down into something familiar. Wrong, dead wrong. The world that existed millions of years before dinosaurs ever showed up was filled with creatures so bizarre they make science fiction look boring. Meet Dimetrodon, the sail-backed predator that ruled North America over 280 million years ago. That massive fin on its back wasn't for show. It was a solar panel. This beast would stand sideways to the morning sun, warming up its blood like a living greenhouse. Once heated, it could move fast while its cold-blooded prey stumbled around sluggishly. Clever, right? But here's the kicker. Dimetrodon wasn't a dinosaur. It wasn't even a reptile. This thing was more closely related to you than to any T-Rex. The weirdness doesn't stop there. Picture Inostrancevia stalking through ancient Russia with saber teeth that would make a tiger jealous. These fangs were so massive, they had special grooves in the skull just to fit them. When Inostrancevia closed its mouth, those deadly daggers slid perfectly into their custom sheaths. This wasn't some primitive experiment. This was precision engineering millions of years before nature invented saber-toothed cats. Then there's Arthropleura, and this one will mess with your head. Remember those harmless little millipedes that curl up in your garden? Well, their ancient cousin was 8 feet long and weighed as much as a large dog. Imagine meeting that thing on a forest path. These gentle giants munched on rotting plants and probably couldn't hurt you if they tried. But tell that to your brain when you're face to face with a millipede the size of a crocodile. The insect world had gone completely insane too. Dragonflies with 2.5-foot wingspans patrolled ancient swamps like feathered dinosaurs of the air. These weren't just big dragonflies, they were aerial nightmares. Their compound eyes contained up to 30,000 individual lenses, giving them vision that would shame a fighter pilot. Hawks and eagles today can spot a mouse from 2 miles away, but these prehistoric dragonflies could track multiple prey items simultaneously while performing impossible aerial maneuvers. But why were insects so ridiculously huge back then? The answer lies in something you take for granted every single breath: oxygen levels. Ancient Earth's atmosphere contained 35% oxygen compared to today's measly 21%. More oxygen meant insects could grow larger without suffocating under their own weight. It's like nature was running on rocket fuel. Ancient amphibians had their own size problem, but in reverse. Today's frogs and salamanders are basically pocket-sized compared to their ancestors. Prehistoric stretched over 30 feet long, making it larger than most dinosaurs that hadn't even evolved yet. This wasn't some chubby salamander lounging by a pond. This was an apex predator that could snatch prehistoric reptiles right off the shoreline. Let's not forget Helicoprion, the buzzsaw shark that makes modern great whites look tame. This oceanic nightmare had a lower jaw that spiraled into a circular saw blade filled with razor-sharp teeth. Scientists spent decades trying to figure out how this thing even ate without cutting its own mouth to ribbons. The current theory? It used that spiral like a chainsaw, slicing prey into manageable chunks. Nature had literally invented the power tool, and the weird part is, most people have never heard of these creatures. Everyone knows about T-Rex and Triceratops, but the monsters that came before dinosaurs were often stranger and sometimes deadlier. Dunkleosteus had no teeth but could bite with the force of a T-Rex using just its razor-sharp bone plates. Helicoprion's saw jaw defied physics. Arthropleura proved that bigger isn't always scarier. Sometimes it's just more unsettling. The real mind-bender? These weren't failed experiments or evolutionary dead ends. Many thrived for millions of years longer than humans have even existed. Dimetrodon's sailback design was so successful that similar features appeared independently in multiple species across different continents. Nature kept returning to the same brilliant solutions over and over again. These ancient giants dominated their world with the same confidence dinosaurs would later show. They ruled land, sea, and sky using body plans that seem impossible today. Massive millipedes munched peacefully through forests, while saber-toothed predators perfected the art of the killing bite. The Earth was their playground, and they played by rules we're still trying to understand. But this prehistoric paradise couldn't last forever. A massive extinction event was brewing, one that would wipe out most of these incredible giants and clear the stage for a new group of animals that would become even more famous, creatures whose very name means terrible lizard. After millions of years of bizarre sailback predators and car-sized millipedes ruling the Earth, something entirely new was brewing. Around 230 million years ago, a group of animals emerged that would change everything. These weren't the massive lumbering beasts you might expect. The first dinosaurs were actually pretty underwhelming. Most early dinosaurs were small, fast runners about the size of chickens or dogs. They scurried around on two legs, darting between the feet of much larger creatures that were still dominating the landscape. Hard to believe these little guys would eventually produce T-Rex, right? But here's the thing about evolution. It loves a good plot twist. These early dinosaurs had a secret weapon that wasn't immediately obvious. Their hip structure was revolutionary. Unlike other reptiles that sprawled with their legs sticking out sideways, dinosaurs held their legs directly underneath their bodies. This might sound boring, but it was like upgrading from a clunky old car to a sports car. They could run faster, longer, and with way more efficiency than anything else around. Well, here's where things get really interesting. Some of these ancient dinosaurs were already sporting feathers millions of years before the first bird ever took flight. We're not talking about the fluffy feathers you see on modern birds. These were more like fuzzy hair or primitive quills. Scientists think these early feathers were probably used for keeping warm or showing off to potential mates, not for flying. Imagine a tiny dinosaur strutting around with colorful fuzz, trying to impress other dinosaurs. Nature's first fashion statement, basically. Then there's the brain situation, which gets pretty wild when you look at some of the later dinosaurs. Take Stegosaurus, that famous dinosaur with the spiky plates running down its back. This creature was roughly the size of a school bus, but its brain was only about as big as a dog's brain. How does something that massive function with such a tiny brain? The answer lies in their spinal cord, which had enlarged sections that help control their massive bodies. It's like having backup computers running the show when the main processor is, well, not exactly cutting edge. But dinosaurs weren't just about size and tiny brains. Some of them developed incredibly sophisticated behaviors and social structures. Fossilized footprints show us that many species traveled in herds, with adults protecting their young in the center of the group. Others built elaborate nests and cared for their babies long after hatching, just like modern birds do. And the weird part is, we keep learning completely unexpected things about what dinosaurs actually ate. For the longest time, scientists assumed certain dinosaurs were strict meat eaters or plant eaters based on their teeth and body structure. Then, we started finding fossilized dinosaur poop. Yes, dinosaur poop is a legitimate scientific goldmine, and discovered that some supposedly carnivorous dinosaurs were actually munching on grass and other plants. Others that looked like peaceful herbivores occasionally snacked on small animals or fish. Speaking of surprising discoveries, some dinosaurs were way more colorful than we ever imagined. Recent fossil finds have preserved microscopic structures called melanosomes, which contain pigments. Scientists can now determine the actual colors of some dinosaur feathers and skin. Borealopelta, a heavily armored dinosaur, was reddish-brown on top and lighter underneath. Perfect camouflage despite weighing as much as a rhinoceros. The diversity among dinosaurs was absolutely staggering. You had long-necked giants that could reach treetops 4 stories high, and you had others that were smaller than modern chickens. Some had elaborate head crests for making trumpet-like sounds, while others had skull decorations that would make a punk rocker jealous. There were dinosaurs with massive claws for digging, others with paddle-like limbs for swimming, and some that could probably climb trees better than most mammals. What really blows your mind is how long dinosaurs dominated the planet. They ruled for over 160 million years. Humans have only been around for about 300,000 years, and we think we're pretty successful. Dinosaurs had us beat by a massive margin, surviving ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and countless other disasters that wiped out less adaptable creatures. Makes sense why they left such an incredible variety of fossils behind, right? From tiny feathered runners to massive long-necked browsers, dinosaurs filled almost every possible ecological niche on land. They were the ultimate success story of prehistoric life. But even as dinosaurs were reaching the peak of their dominance on land, the ancient oceans and skies were hosting their own spectacular monsters that were just as impressive and twice as terrifying. After dinosaurs ruled for millions of years, you'd think we'd covered all the weird creatures. Wrong. Some of the strangest animals that ever lived don't fit into neat categories like dinosaur or mammal. These are the misfits, the evolutionary experiments that make you wonder what nature was thinking. Take Beelzebufo, the devil frog from Madagascar. This wasn't your garden variety pond hopper. At nearly a foot wide and weighing as much as a bowling ball, this massive amphibian had a mouth big enough to swallow baby dinosaurs whole. And it did. Fossil evidence shows these frogs actually hunted small dinosaurs, flipping the usual predator-prey relationship upside down. A frog eating a dinosaur? The ancient world had no rules. But wait, it gets weirder. Meet Thylacosmolus, an animal that looked exactly like a saber-toothed cat, but wasn't related to cats at all. This South American predator was actually a marsupial, more closely related to kangaroos and opossums than any feline. Its massive saber teeth grew continuously throughout its life, like a beaver's teeth, because they never stopped getting longer. Evolution had created the same hunting solution twice in completely different animal families. Talk about convergent evolution showing off. Then there's Chaerovipteryx, which takes the award for most backwards flying animal ever. While bats use their arms as wings and birds evolved from arm-winged dinosaurs, this little reptile decided to be different. It glided using wings attached to its hind legs, keeping its front legs free for landing and climbing. Picture a tiny reptilian hang glider, except the wings are where you'd least expect them. Scientists are still scratching their heads about how this arrangement actually worked in flight. Speaking of head scratchers, let's talk about the Tully monster. This creature is so bizarre that after decades of study, paleontologists still can't agree on what it was. Found in Illinois coal deposits, Tullimonstrum had a long snout with a claw at the end, eyes on stalks, and a body that defied classification. Was it a worm? A mollusk? Some kind of early vertebrate? The scientific community remains split. It's the only animal so weird that it became Illinois' official state fossil, and we're still not sure what we're looking at. The prehistoric world also had real unicorns. Well, sort of. Elasmotherium, dubbed the Siberian unicorn, was actually a massive rhinoceros with a single horn that could reach 6 feet long. Unlike the delicate horse-like unicorns of fairy tales, this beast weighed as much as 3 cars and stood taller than a giraffe. It roamed the grasslands of Russia and Central Asia until surprisingly recently. Some might have survived until humans were building the first cities. Imagine early farmers telling stories about these genuine one-horned giants. Ancient Australia produced Megalania, a monitor lizard that stretched over 20 feet long and weighed nearly a ton. This wasn't just a big lizard, it was likely venomous, like its smaller modern relatives, the Komodo dragons. A venomous predator the size of a crocodile, capable of taking down prey as large as giant marsupials and early humans. Australia's reputation for dangerous animals clearly has deep historical roots. Let's not forget Carnotaurus, the meat-eating bull. This dinosaur had horns above its eyes like a demon and tiny vestigial arms that made T-Rex look well-equipped. Its arms were so small, they didn't even have elbows. Just stumpy appendages that served no apparent purpose. But what it lacked in arm development, it made up for in speed. Built like a prehistoric sports car, Carnotaurus could probably outrun most of its prey across open ground. The ancient world even had mammals that seemed pulled from mythology. Uintatherium looked like someone had crossed an elephant with a rhino and then added extra horns for good measure. 6 bony knobs protruded from its skull, and massive saber teeth jutted downward from its upper jaw. Despite its fearsome appearance, this bizarre creature was actually a plant eater, using those intimidating teeth to strip bark and tough vegetation. These evolutionary experiments remind us that the path of life isn't always straightforward. Nature tried countless designs, most of which didn't survive to the present day. Some failed because they were too specialized, others because changing climates made their lifestyles impossible. A few simply got unlucky when asteroids struck or ice ages arrived. What's fascinating is how these strange creatures often filled ecological roles in completely unexpected ways. Who would predict that frogs could be dinosaur predators, or that the most fearsome-looking plant eaters would sport multiple horns and saber teeth? While these oddball species dominated land, even stranger giants ruled the ancient seas and skies, proving that weirdness wasn't limited to terrestrial life. While dinosaurs stomped around on land, the real monsters lived in the oceans. And when I say monsters, I mean creatures that would make today's great white sharks look like goldfish. The ancient seas were basically a nightmare aquarium filled with predators that could swallow a small boat whole. Take the mosasaurs, for example. These weren't dinosaurs at all. They were marine reptiles that grew over 50 feet long. Their jaws could crush a car, and their teeth were designed like railroad spikes. Mosasaurs ruled the oceans like underwater tyrannosaurs. except they were even more terrifying because you couldn't see them coming from below. But here's where things get really wild. Plesiosaurs looked like someone took a snake, stuck it on a turtle's body, then gave it 4 massive flippers instead of legs. Some species had necks longer than a giraffe's, which sounds ridiculous until you realize they used those necks like underwater periscopes. They'd keep their massive bodies hidden in murky water while their heads popped up 20 feet away to grab unsuspecting prey. The weirdest part? Scientists still argue about how plesiosaurs actually swam. Did they fly through the water like sea turtles or row like ancient galleys? Recent studies suggest they basically did underwater barrel rolls to catch fish, spinning their entire bodies while their necks stayed perfectly still. Talk about showing off. Then there's the flying department, where things got absolutely bonkers. Everyone calls pterodactyls flying dinosaurs, but that's completely wrong. Pterosaurs were their own weird branch of reptiles that figured out flight millions of years before birds existed. And they didn't just figure it out, they perfected it. Pteranodon had a wingspan wider than a small airplane, 23 feet of pure soaring power. These weren't clumsy gliders either. They were precision flying machines that could probably outmaneuver most modern birds. Their wings were made of leather-like skin stretched between incredibly long finger bones. Basically, they were flying on modified hands. Want to know something that'll blow your mind? Some pterosaurs were covered in fuzzy hair-like fibers called cycnofibers. Picture a giant flying teddy bear with wings, and you're getting close. Scientists think this fuzz helped them regulate body temperature, which means these cold-blooded reptiles were actually pretty sophisticated when it came to staying warm. The really massive pterosaurs make Pteranodon look tiny. Quetzalcoatlus had a wingspan of nearly 40 feet. That's bigger than many fighter jets. This thing was basically a flying giraffe that could probably pick up a small dinosaur and carry it away like a hawk grabbing a mouse. The fossil evidence suggests it was tall enough to look a T-Rex in the eye when standing on the ground. Let's not forget about the ocean's most bizarre predators, though. Ancient sea scorpions, called eurypterids, grew over 8 feet long and had claws that could crack shells like walnuts. These weren't actually scorpions, they were more like underwater lobsters with attitude problems and serious size issues. Some eurypterids had paddles instead of walking legs, turning them into aquatic nightmares that could chase down prey in open water. Others had massive crushing claws that worked like hydraulic presses. And the creepy part is they had compound eyes like modern insects, so they could probably see you coming from multiple angles at once. The ancient oceans were also home to ammonites, basically nautiluses on steroids. Some grew shells 6 feet across and had tentacles covered in hooks instead of suckers. They were like underwater krakens, except they were real, and their shells turned into beautiful spiral fossils that people still find on beaches today. What really gets me is how these marine reptiles breathed. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs had to surface for air just like whales do now, but they could hold their breath for hours. Imagine being a small coastal dinosaur getting a drink of water when suddenly this massive head erupts from the surface 50 feet offshore. No wonder most dinosaurs stuck to being vegetarians. The flying reptiles had their own breathing tricks too. Pterosaurs had air sacs in their bones, just like modern birds. This made them incredibly light for their size, but also gave them super efficient respiratory systems. They could probably fly at high altitudes where oxygen is thin, giving them access to airspace that nothing else could reach. But here's the thing that connects all these incredible sky and sea monsters. They were all perfectly adapted to their environments in ways that seem almost engineered. While these giants ruled the air and oceans, something much smaller was quietly evolving alongside the dinosaurs on land, preparing to inherit the Earth in ways nobody could have predicted. While massive dinosaurs stomped around being the obvious stars of the prehistoric world, something much smaller was quietly making one of evolution's biggest moves. Mammals were evolving right under the dinosaurs' noses, and the weird part is, these early mammals were nothing like the furry creatures we know today. Most people think mammals only got their big break after dinosaurs went extinct. Wrong. Mammals actually showed up around 200 million years ago, which means they lived alongside dinosaurs for over 130 million years. That's longer than dinosaurs have been extinct. But here's the catch. These ancient mammals were tiny. We're talking mouse-sized creatures scurrying around in a world full of giants. Take Morganucodon, one of the earliest true mammals. This little guy was about the size of a shrew and spent most of its time hiding from dinosaurs that could step on it without even noticing. But Morganucodon had something special going on. It had hair, warm blood, and probably fed milk to its babies. Sound familiar? These were the features that would eventually help mammals take over the world. Then there's Castrocata, which completely flips our idea of what early mammals were like. This beaver-like creature didn't just run around on land, it swam. Castrocata had webbed feet, a flat tail for steering, and waterproof fur. While dinosaurs ruled the land and sky, this clever mammal found its own niche in rivers and lakes. Smart move, considering there were fewer giant predators in the water. But wait, it gets weirder. Some early mammals took to the skies too. Velaticotherium was basically a flying squirrel from 125 million years ago. It had skin flaps stretching between its limbs, letting it glide between trees. Makes sense, right? If you're small and the ground is crawling with dinosaurs, why not take the express route through the treetops? The really surprising part about these ancient mammals is what they ate. Sure, most munched on insects and plants, but some got pretty bold about their menu choices. Rapinomamus was one mammal that didn't mess around. This badger-sized creature actually ate baby dinosaurs. Paleontologists found dinosaur bones in its stomach. Talk about turning the tables. Here was a mammal making dinosaurs the meal instead of the other way around. Fossil evidence shows these early mammals were incredibly diverse in ways we never expected. Some had poisonous spurs like modern platypuses. Others had teeth that kept growing throughout their lives, perfect for chomping tough plant material. A few even developed echolocation, using sound to navigate in the dark while dinosaurs slept. Let's not forget about Juramaia, one of the earliest placental mammals. This tiny tree climber gave birth to live young instead of laying eggs. That might not sound revolutionary, but it was huge. Live birth meant baby mammals could be born more developed and ready to survive in a dangerous world. No waiting around for eggs to hatch while hungry dinosaurs prowled nearby. The fossil record reveals something fascinating about mammal teeth from this period. Unlike reptiles that typically have similar shaped teeth, early mammals developed specialized teeth for different jobs. Sharp teeth for tearing meat, flat teeth for grinding plants, and everything in between. This dental diversity let mammals exploit food sources that dinosaurs couldn't touch. What really kept mammals in the game during the age of dinosaurs was their ability to stay small and adaptable. When you're tiny, you need less food, can hide in smaller spaces, and reproduce faster. While dinosaurs were busy being giants, mammals perfected the art of survival through flexibility. They could eat almost anything, live almost anywhere, and breed quickly enough to bounce back from disasters. Some early mammals even developed social behaviors. Fruitifossor lived in burrows and probably formed small communities underground. These mammal neighborhoods provided safety in numbers and shared warmth during cold nights. Pretty clever for creatures supposedly living in the shadow of dinosaurs. The strangest early mammal might be Gobiconodon, which had teeth like a crocodile but the body of a large mammal. This predator was big enough to hunt small dinosaurs and probably wasn't afraid of much. It shows that even during dinosaur times, some mammals were experimenting with being bigger and more aggressive. And here's something that'll blow your mind. Hair wasn't just for warmth. Early mammal hair was incredibly sensitive, helping them detect vibrations and air currents. This gave them early warning systems for approaching predators. When you're living in a world full of dinosaurs, every advantage counts. These remarkable mammals were quietly developing all the traits that would eventually make them dominant. They just had to wait for the right moment. Little did they know that moment was coming in the form of a massive asteroid that would change everything. After dinosaurs vanished and mammals took over, Earth entered a period of dramatic climate swings. Ice ages came and went like clockwork, and during these frozen epochs, some of the most incredible beasts ever to walk our planet emerged. We're talking about creatures so massive and bizarre that they make today's largest animals look like house pets. Woolly mammoths stand as the poster children of the Ice Age, but here's what most people don't realize. These weren't just hairy elephants wandering around aimlessly. These giants reached 13 feet tall and weighed up to 6 tons. Their curved tusks could grow over 16 feet long, essentially making them walking ivory sculptures. But the really wild part? Scientists have found mammoth specimens so well preserved in Siberian ice that their blood was still liquid. Some had undigested flowers in their stomachs, giving us a perfect snapshot of their last meal from 40,000 years ago. Then there were the saber-toothed cats, and no, they weren't tigers with extra long teeth. Smilodon, the most famous species, had canine teeth that stretched 7 inches long. These weren't just for show either. Recent studies suggest these cats didn't use their sabers like knives. They used them like can openers, precisely puncturing the throats of massive prey. The downside? Those teeth were so specialized that when large prey started disappearing, these cats couldn't adapt fast enough. Let's not forget about the ground sloths that completely flip our understanding of what a sloth should be. Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, weighed as much as an elephant and stood 12 feet tall on its hind legs. Unlike their tiny tree-dwelling cousins today, these behemoths were built like tanks. They had massive claws that could strip bark from trees and powerful enough limbs to knock down entire forests. Some species even lived in caves, and we found their claw marks still scratched into cave walls across South America. North America hosted its own parade of oversized weirdness. Giant beavers the size of black bears built dams that would make modern engineers jealous. These weren't cute, buck-toothed versions of today's beavers. Castoroids had teeth that grew continuously and were so large they probably couldn't gnaw wood the way modern beavers do. Instead, they likely used those massive choppers to slice through tough aquatic plants like living hedge trimmers. But here's where things get really interesting. The dire wolf actually existed, and it was nothing like the giant mythical beasts from fantasy stories. Real dire wolves were only slightly larger than modern gray wolves, but they were built completely differently. Their skulls were broader, their teeth were designed for crushing bone, and they had incredibly powerful jaw muscles. These weren't lone hunters either. Fossil evidence from the La Brea tar pits shows they hunted in packs, sometimes dozens at a time, taking down prey that no single predator could handle. Giant camels roamed North America during this period, which sounds absurd until you realize that camels actually evolved in North America first. Camelops stood 7 feet tall and looked more like a cross between a modern camel and a horse. They eventually migrated to Asia and Africa, becoming the camels we know today, while their North American cousins went extinct. Makes you wonder what other animals we think of as foreign actually started right in our backyard. The American cheetah presents another mind-bending example. This wasn't a cheetah that wandered over from Africa, it was a completely different cat that evolved similar features. Myricinonyx could run just as fast as African cheetahs, had similar body proportions, and filled the exact same ecological role. This is what scientists call convergent evolution, where totally unrelated animals develop nearly identical solutions to the same problems. And the weird part is how recently some of these giants disappeared. Woolly mammoths survived on remote Arctic islands until just 4,000 years ago. That's after the pyramids were built. Ground sloths in the Caribbean lived until around 5,000 years ago. Some of these creatures were sharing the planet with early human civilizations, yet they seem impossibly ancient to us now. Giant Irish elk deserve special mention for having the most impractical headgear in mammal history. Despite their name, they weren't elk and didn't live only in Ireland. These deer had antlers that spanned 12 feet across and weighed up to 90 pounds. Imagine trying to run through a forest while balancing a small boat on your head. That's essentially what these animals dealt with every day. The Ice Age created a world where bigger was almost always better for survival. But as the climate warmed and humans spread across the globe, these magnificent giants faced challenges they couldn't overcome. Yet some creatures from this era managed something remarkable. They found ways to survive in a rapidly changing world. Right now, in the deepest parts of the ocean, there's a fish swimming around that's basically a living fossil. The coelacanth was supposed to be extinct for 66 million years. Scientists knew it only from fossils until 1938, when a fisherman caught one off the coast of South Africa. Talk about a surprise catch of the day. This prehistoric survivor has barely changed since dinosaurs walked the earth. Its fins look more like stubby legs, and it can live for over 100 years. But here's what gets really interesting. Horseshoe crabs have been crawling around for 450 million years, making them older than trees. Their blue blood is so valuable that we use it to test medical equipment for bacteria. Each horseshoe crab can be worth $15,000 in the medical industry. These living tanks survived multiple mass extinctions while countless other species vanished. Then there's the discovery that flipped everything we thought we knew about human history. Cave paintings in Europe show that our ancestors were drawing woolly mammoths, cave bears, and giant Irish elk. These weren't mythical creatures from their imagination. Humans actually lived alongside these massive beasts. Some of these paintings are so detailed that scientists use them to understand how these animals looked and behaved. And the weird part is how recently some of these prehistoric giants disappeared. Woolly mammoths were still alive when the pyramids were being built in Egypt. A small population survived on Wrangel Island in Russia until about 4,000 years ago. Ground sloths the size of cars were hanging around in South America until humans showed up with spears and fire. The last giant lemurs in Madagascar vanished just 500 years ago. Some were as big as gorillas. Let's talk about something that might blow your mind. Every time you eat chicken nuggets, you're technically eating dinosaur. Birds aren't just related to dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs. The T-Rex shares more DNA with a chicken than with a crocodile. Makes sense, right? Next time you see a pigeon strutting around, remember you're looking at a direct descendant of creatures that once ruled the planet. Modern discoveries keep proving that prehistoric life was even weirder than we imagined. In 2019, scientists found a fossilized snake in Argentina that was 50 feet long and weighed as much as a car. They're calling it Titanoboa's cousin. Just last year, researchers discovered a new species of giant penguin that stood 6 feet tall and lived 55 million years ago. This thing could have looked a human in the eye. But wait, there's more strangeness hiding in plain sight. Sharks are older than trees, older than Saturn's rings, and have survived 4 major mass extinctions. Some individual Greenland sharks alive today might have been swimming when George Washington was president. These Arctic giants can live over 400 years and don't even reach maturity until they're 150. The fossil record keeps revealing surprises that rewrite textbooks. Scientists recently found evidence that some dinosaurs had colorful feathers, not just brown or black, but brilliant reds, blues, and iridescent patterns like peacocks. They can tell this by studying microscopic structures in fossilized feathers under powerful microscopes. Imagine a rainbow-colored T-Rex strutting through ancient forests. Well, here's something that'll make you question everything. Some prehistoric creatures were so bizarre that when scientists first discovered them, they thought someone was playing a prank. The platypus was so weird that European scientists initially believed it was a hoax. Someone had sewn a duck's bill onto a beaver's body. Turns out nature had already created something far stranger than any hoax. DNA analysis is revealing connections nobody saw coming. Elephants are more closely related to tiny rock hyraxes than to any other large mammal. Whales evolved from small, furry, four-legged creatures that looked like wolves. The closest living relative to the mighty T-Rex? A chicken, as we mentioned, but specifically the red jungle fowl that chickens descended from. Every year brings new discoveries that push back the timeline of life on Earth. Recently, scientists found evidence of possible life forms 4.1 billion years ago. That's almost as old as Earth itself. Fossil footprints in Canada suggest animals were walking on land 100 million years earlier than previously thought. Each discovery forces us to rewrite what we thought we knew about ancient life. The most mind-bending part? We've probably only discovered about 15% of all species that ever lived. Millions of prehistoric creatures are still buried in rocks, waiting to be found. Every fossil dig could uncover the next missing link or reveal an entirely new branch of the evolutionary tree. From bacteria that started it all to the mammals that inherited the Earth after dinosaurs vanished, life has always found ways to surprise us. But speaking of surprises, you might be shocked to learn how many everyday things in your life connect directly to these ancient worlds.